Section 1 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. The Last Dream of Bwona Khubla. The Last Dream of Bwona Khubla. From steaming lowlands down by the equator, where monstrous orchids blow, where beetles big as mice sit on the tent ropes, and fireflies glide about by night like little moving stars, the travellers went 3 days through forests of cactus till they came to the open plains where the oryx are. And glad they were when they came to the water hole where only one white man had gone before, which the natives know as the camp of Bwona Khubla, and found the water there. It lies 3 days from the nearest other water, and when Bwona Khubla had gone there 3 years ago, what with malaria with which he was shaking all over, and what with disgust at finding the water hole dry, he had decided to die there, and in that part of the world such decisions are always fatal. In any case he was overdue to die, but hitherto his amazing resolution and that terrible strength of character that so astounded his porters had kept him alive and moved his safari on. He had had a name, no doubt, some common name such as hangs as likely as not over scores of shops in London, but that had gone long ago, and nothing identified his memory now to distinguish it from the memories of all the other dead but Bwona Khubla, the name the Kikuyus gave him. There is no doubt that he was a fearful man, a man that was dreaded still for his personal force when his arm was no longer able to lift the kiboko, when all his men knew he was dying, and to this day, though he is dead, though his temper was embittered by malaria and the equatorial sun, nothing impaired his will, which remained a compulsive force to the very last, impressing itself upon all, and after the last, from what the Kikuyus say, the country must have had powerful laws that drove Bwona Khubla out, whatever country it was. On the morning of the day that they were to come to the camp of Bwona Khubla, all the porters came to the travellers' tents asking for dow. Dow is the white man's medicine that cures all evils. The nastier it tastes, the better it is. They wanted down this morning to keep away devils, for they were near the place where Bwona Khubla died. The travellers gave them quinine. By sunset they came to camp in Bwona Khubla and found water there. Had they not found water, many of them must have died, yet none felt any gratitude to the place. It seemed too ominous, too full of doom, too much harassed almost by unseen, irresistible things. And all the natives came again for dow as soon as the tents were pitched, to protect them from the last dreams of Bwona Khubla, which they say had stayed behind when the last safari left, taking Bwona Khubla's body back to the edge of civilization to show to the white men there that they had not killed him, for the white men might not know that they durst not kill Bwona Khubla. And the travellers gave them more quinine, so much being bad for the nerves, and that night by the campfires there was no pleasant talk, all talking at once of meat they had eaten and cattle that each one owned, but a gloomy silence hung by every fire and the little canvas shelters. They told the white men that Bwona Khubla's city, of which he had thought at the last, and where the natives believed he was once a king, of which he had raved till the loneliness rang with his raving, had settled down all about them, and they were afraid, for it was so strange a city and wanted more dow. And the 2 travellers gave them more quinine, for they saw real fear in their faces and knew they might run away and leave them alone in that place, that they too had come to fear with an almost equal dread, though they knew not why. And as the night wore on, their feeling of boding deepened, although they had shared 3 bottles or so of champagne that they meant to keep for days when they killed a lion. This is the story that each of those 2 men tell, and which their porters corroborate. But then a Kikuyu will always say whatever he thinks is expected of him. The travellers were both in bed and trying to sleep, but not able to do so because of an ominous feeling. That mournfullest of all the cries of the wild, the hyena, like a damned soul lamenting, strangely enough had ceased. The night wore on to the hour when Bwona had died 3 or 4 years ago, dreaming and raving of his city, and in the hush a sound softly arose, like a wind at first, then like the roar of beasts, then unmistakably the sound of motors and motor buses. And then they saw, clearly and unmistakably they say, in that lonely desolation where the equator comes up out of the forest and climbs over jagged hills, they say they saw London. There could have been no moon that night, but they say there was a multitude of stars. Mists had come rolling up at evening about the pinnacles of unexplored red peaks that clustered round the camp, but they say the mist must have cleared later on. At any rate they swear they could see London, see it and hear the roar of it. Both say they saw it, not as they knew it at all, not debased by hundreds of thousands of lying advertisements, but transfigured, all its houses magnificent, its chimneys rising grandly into pinnacles, its vast squares full of the most gorgeous trees, transfigured, and yet London. Its windows were warm and happy, shining at night. The lamps in their long rows welcomed you. The public houses were gracious, jovial places. Yet it was London. They could smell the smells of London, hear London songs, and yet it was never the London that they knew. It was as though they had looked on some strange woman's face with the eyes of her lover. For of all the towns of the earth, or cities of song, of all the spots there be, unhallowed or hallowed, it seemed to those 2 men then that the city they saw was of all places the most to be desired by far. They say a barrel organ played quite near them. They say a coster was singing. They admit that he was singing out of tune. They admit a Cockney accent, and yet they say that that song had in it something that no earthly song had ever had before, and both men say that they would have wept, but that there was a feeling about their heartstrings that was far too deep for tears. They believe that the longing of this masterful man that was able to rule a safari by raising a hand had been so strong at the last that it had impressed itself deeply upon nature and had caused a mirage that may not fade wholly away, perhaps for several years. I tried to establish by questions the truth or reverse of this story, but the 2 men's tempers had been so spoiled by Africa that they were not up to cross-examination. They would not even say if their campfires were still burning. They say that they saw the London lights all round them from 11 o'clock till midnight. They could hear London voices and the sound of the traffic clearly, and over all, a little misty perhaps, but unmistakably London, arose the great metropolis. After midnight London quivered a little and grew more indistinct. The sound of the traffic began to dwindle away. Voices seemed farther off, ceased altogether, and all was quiet once more where the mirage shimmered and faded, and a bull rhinoceros coming down through the stillness snorted, and watered at the Carlton Club. End of section 1. Section 2 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. How the office of Postman fell vacant in Otford-under-the-Wold. How the office of Postman fell vacant in Otford-under-the-Wold. The duties of postman at Otford-under-the-Wold carried Meoul Sleggins farther afield than the village, farther afield than the last house in the lane, right up to the big bare wold and the house where no one went. No one, that is, but the three grim men that dwelt there, and the secretive wife of one. And once a year, when the queer green letter came, Meoul Sleggins, the postman. The green letter always came just as the leaves were turning, addressed to the eldest of the three grim men, with a wonderful Chinese stamp and the Otford postmark, and Meoul Sleggins carried it up to the house. He was not afraid to go, for he always took the letter, had done so for 7 years. Yet whenever summer began to draw to a close, Meoul Sleggins was ill at ease, and if there was a touch of autumn about, shivered unduly, so that all folk wondered. And then one day a wind would blow from the east, and the wild geese would appear, having left the sea, flying high and crying strangely, and pass till they were no more than a thin black line in the sky, like a magical stick flung up by a doer of magic, twisting and twirling away, and the leaves would turn on the trees, and the mists be white on the marshes, and the sun set large and red, and autumn would step down quietly that night from the wold, and the next day the strange green letter would come from China. His fear of the three grim men and that secretive woman and their lonely secluded house, or else the cadaverous cold of the dying season, rather braced Meoul when the time was come, and he would step out bolder upon the day, that he feared than he had perhaps for weeks. He longed on that day for a letter for the last house in the lane. There he would dally and talk a while, and look on church-going faces, before his last tramp over the lonely wold, to end at the dreaded door of the queer grey house called Wold Hut. When he came to the door of Wold Hut, he would give the postman's knock as though he came on ordinary rounds to a house of every day, although no path led up to it, although the skins of weasels hung thickly from upper windows. And scarcely had his postman's knock rung through the dark of the house, when the eldest of the three grim men would always run to the door. Oh, what a face had he! There was more slyness in it than ever his beard could hide. He would put out a gristly hand, and into it Meoul Sleggins would put the letter from China, and rejoice that his duty was done, and would turn and stride away, and the fields lit up before him. But ominous, eager and low murmuring arose in the Wold Hut. For 7 years this was so, and no harm had come to Sleggins. 7 times he had gone to the Wold Hut, and as often come safely away. And then he needs must marry, perhaps because she was young, perhaps because she was fair, or because she had shapely ankles, as she came one day through the marshes, among the milkmaid flowers, shoeless in spring. Less things than these have brought men to their ends, and been the nooses with which fate snared them running. With marriage, curiosity entered his house, and one day as they walked with evening through the meadows, one summer evening, she asked him of Wold Hut, where he only went, and what the folks were like that no one else had seen. All this he told her, and then she asked him of the green letter from China that came with autumn and what the letter contained. He read to her all the rules of the inland revenue. He told her he did not know, that it was not right that he should know. He lectured her on the sin of inquisitiveness. He quoted Parson, and in the end she said that she must know. They argued concerning this for many days, days of the ending of summer, of shortening evenings, and as they argued autumn grew nearer and nearer, and the green letter from China. And at last he promised that when the green letter came he would take it as usual to the lonely house, and then hide somewhere near and creep to the window at nightfall and hear what the grim folk said. Perhaps they might read aloud the letter from China. And before he had time to repent of that promise, a cold wind came one night, and the woods turned golden. The plover went in bands at evening over the marshes. The year had turned, and there came the letter from China. Never before had Meoul felt such misgivings as he went his postman's rounds. Never before had he so much feared the day that took him up to the wold and the lonely house. While snug by the fire, his wife looked pleasurably forward to curiosity's gratification, and hoped to have news ere nightfall that all the gossips of the village would envy. One consolation only had Meoul as he set out with a shiver. There was a letter that day for the last house in the lane. Long did he tarry there to look at their cheery faces, to hear the sound of their laughter. You did not hear laughter in Wold.to. And when the last topic had been utterly talked out, and no excuse for lingering remained, he heaved a heavy sigh and plodded grimly away, and so came late to Wold.to. He gave his postman's knock on the shut oak door, heard it reverberate through the silent house, saw the grim elder man and his gristly hand, gave up the green letter from China, and strode away. There is a clump of trees growing all alone in the wold, desolate, mournful by day, by night full of ill omen, far off from all other trees as Wold.to from other houses. Near it stands Wold.to. Not to-day did Meoul stride briskly on, with all the new winds of autumn blowing cheerily past him, till he saw the village before him and broke into song. But as soon as he was out of sight of the house, he turned, and stooping behind a fold of the ground, ran back to the desolate wood. There he waited, watching the evil house, just too far to hear voices. The sun was low already. He chose the window at which he meant to eavesdrop, a little barred one at the back, close to the ground. And then the pigeons came in. For a great distance there was no other wood, so numbers shelter there, though the clump is small, and of so evil a look, if they noticed that. The first one frightened Meoul. He felt that it might be a spirit escaped from torture in some dim parlour of the house that he watched. His nerves were strained, and he feared foolish fears. Then he grew used to them, and the sun set then, and the aspect of everything altered, and he felt strange fears again. Behind him was a hollow in the wold. He watched it darkening, and before him he saw the house through the trunks of the trees. He waited for them to light their lamps, so that they could not see, when he would steal up softly and crouch by the little back window. But though every bird was home, though the night grew chilly as tombs, though a star was out, still there shone no yellow light from any window. Meoul waited and shuddered. He did not dare to move till they lit their lamps. They might be watching. The damp and the cold so strangely affected him that autumn evening, and the remnants of sunset. The stars and the wold and the whole vault of the sky seemed like a hall that they had prepared for fear. He began to feel a dread of prodigious things, and still no light shone in the evil house. It grew so dark that he decided to move and make his way to the window in spite of the stillness, and though the house was dark. He rose, and while standing arrested by pains that cramped his limbs, he heard the door swing open on the far side of the house. He had just time to hide behind the trunk of a pine when the three grim men approached him, and the woman hobbled behind. Right to the ominous clump of trees they came, as though they loved their blackness, passed through within a yard or two of the postman, and squatted down on their haunches in a ring in the hollow behind the trees. They lit a fire in the hollow and laid a kid on the fire, and by the light of it Meoul saw brought forth from an untanned pouch the letter that came from China. The elder opened it with his gristly hand, and intoning words that Meoul did not know, drew out from it a green powder and sprinkled it on the fire. At once a flame arose and a wonderful savour. The flames rose higher and flickered, turning the trees all green, and Meoul saw the gods coming to snuff the savour. While the three grim men prostrated themselves by their fire, and the horrible woman that was the spouse of one, he saw the gods coming gauntly over the wold, beheld the gods of old England hungrily snuffing the savour. Odin, Balder, and Thor, the gods of the ancient people, beheld them eye to eye, clear and close in the twilight, and the office of postman fell vacant in Otford-under-the-Wold. End of section 2. Section 3 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. The Prayer of Boob Aheera. The Prayer of Boob Aheera. In the harbour, between the liner and the palms, as the huge ship's passengers came up from dinner, at moonrise each in his canoe, Ali Karib Ahash and Boob Aheera passed within knife thrust. So urgent was the purpose of Ali Karib Ahash that he did not lean over as his enemy slid by, did not tarry then to settle that long account, but that Boob Aheera made no attempt to reach him was a source of wonder to Ali. He pondered it till the liner's electric lights shone far away behind him with one blaze, and the canoe was near to his destination, and pondered it in vain, for all that the eastern subtlety of his mind was able to tell him clearly was that it was not like Boob Aheera to pass him like that. That Boob Aheera could have dared to lay such a cause as his before the Diamond Idol, Ali had not conceived. Yet as he drew near to the golden shrine in the palms, that none that come by the great ships ever found, he began to see more clearly in his mind that this was where Boob had gone on that hot night. And when he beached his canoe, his fears departed, giving place to the resignation with which he always viewed destiny, for there on the white sea sand were the tracks of another canoe, the edges all fresh and ragged. Boob Aheera had been before him. Ali did not blame himself for being late. The thing had been planned before the beginning of time by gods that knew their business. Only his hate of Boob Aheera increased, his enemy against whom he had come to pray. And the more his hate increased, the more clearly he saw him, until nothing else could be seen by the eye of his mind but the dark lean figure, the little lean legs, the grey beard and neat loincloth of Aheera, his enemy. That the diamond idol should have granted the prayers of such a one he did not as yet imagine. He hated him merely for his presumptuousness in approaching the shrine at all, for approaching it before him whose cause was righteous, for many an old past wrong, but most of all for the expression of his face and the general look of the man as he has swept by in his canoe with his double paddle going in the moonlight. Ali pushed through the steaming vegetation. The place smelt of orchids. There is no track to the shrine, though many go. If there were a track the white man would one day find it, and parties would row to see it whenever a liner came in, and photographs would appear in weekly papers with accounts of it underneath by men who had never left London, and all the mystery would be gone away, and there would be nothing novel in this story. Ali had scarcely gone 100 yards through cactus and creeper underneath the palms when he came to the golden shrine that nothing guards except the deeps of the forest, and found the diamond idol. The diamond idol is 5 inches high and its base a good inch square, and it has a greater lustre than those diamonds that Mr. Moses bought last year for his wife, when he offered her an earldom or the diamonds, and Jael his wife had answered, "Buy the diamonds and be just plain, Mr. Fortescue." Purer than those was its lustre, and carved as they carve not in Europe, and the men thereby are poor and held to be fearless, yet they do not sell that idol. And I may say here that if any one of my readers should ever come by ship to the winding harbour where the forts of the Portuguese crumble in infinite greenery, where the baobab stands like a corpse here and there in the palms, if he goes ashore where no one has any business to go, and where no one, so far as I know, has gone from a liner before, though it's little more than a mile or so from the pier, and if he finds a golden shrine which is near enough to the shore, and a 5-inch diamond in it carved in the shape of a god, it is better to leave it alone and get back safe to the ship than to sell that diamond idol for any price in the world. Ali Khubla went into the golden shrine, and when he raised his head from the 7 obeisances that are the due of the idol, behold, it glowed with such a lustre as only it wears after answering recent prayer. No native of those parts mistakes the tone of the idol. They know its varying shades as a tracker knows blood. The moon was streaming in through the open door, and Ali saw it clearly. No one had been that night but Aheera. The fury of Ali rose and surged to his heart. He clutched his knife till the hilt of it bruised his hand, yet he did not utter the prayer that he had made ready about Aheera's liver, for he saw that Aheera's prayers were acceptable to the idol, and knew that divine protection was over his enemy. What Aheera's prayer was he did not know, but he went back to the beach as fast as one can go through cacti and creepers that climb to the tops of the palms, and as fast as his canoe could carry him he went down the winding harbour, till the liner shone beside him as he passed, and he heard the sound of its band rise up and die, and he landed and came that night into Aheera's hut, and there he offered himself as his enemy's slave, and Aheera's slave he is to this day, and his master has protection from the idol. And Ali rows to the liners and goes on board to sell rubies made of glass, and thin suits for the tropics, and ivory napkin rings, and Manchester kimonos and lovely little shells. And the passengers abuse him because of his prices, and yet they should not, for all the money cheated by Ali Khubla goes to Aheera, his master. End of section 3.
Section 4 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Assaf Koss. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. East and West. It was dead of night and midwinter. A frightful wind was bringing sleet from the east. The long sere grasses were wailing. Two specks of light appeared on the desolate plain. A man in a hansom cab was driving alone in North China. Alone with the driver and the dejected horse. The driver wore a good waterproof cape, and of course an oiled silk hat, but the man in the cab wore nothing but evening dress. He did not have the glass door down because the horse fell so frequently. The sleet had put his cigar out, and it was too cold to sleep. The two lamps flared in the wind. By the uncertain light of a candle lamp that flickered inside the cab, a Manchu shepherd that saw the vehicle pass, where he watched his sheep on the plain in fear of the wolves, for the first time saw evening dress. And though he saw if dimly, and what he saw was wet, it was like a backward glance of 1,000 years, for as his civilization is so much older than ours, they have presumably passed through all that kind of thing. He watched it stoically, not wondering at a new thing, if indeed it be new to China, meditated on it a while in a manner strange to us, and when he had added to his philosophy what little could be derived from the sight of this hansom cab, returned to his contemplation of that night's chances of wolves, and to such occasional thoughts as he drew, at times, for his comfort out of the legends of China, that have been preserved for such uses. And on such a night, their comfort was greatly needed. He thought of the legend of a dragon lady, more fair than the flowers are, without an equal amongst daughters of man, humanly lovely to look on, although her sire was a dragon, yet one who traced his descent from gods of the elder days. And so it was that she went in all her ways divine, like the earliest ones of her race, who were holier than the emperor. She had come down one day out of her little land, a grassy valley hidden amongst the mountains. By the way of the mountain passes she came down, and the rocks of the rugged pass rang like little bells about her, as her bare feet went by, like silver bells to please her. And the sound was like the sound of the dromedaries of a prince when they come home at evening. Their silver bells are ringing, and the village folk are glad. She had come down to pick the enchanted poppy that grew and grows to this day, if only man might find it, in a field at the feet of the mountains. If one should pick it, happiness would come to all yellow men, victory without fighting, good wages, and ceaseless ease. She came down, all fair from the mountains, and as the legend pleasantly passed through his mind in the bitterest hour of the night, which comes before dawn, two lights appeared, and another hansom went by. The man in the second cab was dressed the same as the first. He was wetter than the first, for the sleet had fallen all night, but evening dress is evening dress all the world over. The driver wore the same oiled hat, the same waterproof cape as the other. And when the cab had passed, the darkness swirled back where the two small lamps had been, and the slush poured into the wheel tracks, and nothing remained but the speculations of the shepherd to tell that a hansom cab had been in that part of China. Presently even these ceased, and he was back with the early legends again, in contemplation of serener things. And the storm and the cold and the darkness made one last effort, and shook the bones of that shepherd, and rattled the teeth in the head that mused on the flowery fables. and suddenly it was morning. You saw the outlines of the sheep all of a sudden. The shepherd counted them. No wolf had come. You could see them all quite clearly. And in the pale light of the earliest morning, the third hansom appeared, with its lamp still burning, looking ridiculous in the daylight. They came out of the east with the sleet, and were all going due westwards, and the occupant of the third cab also wore evening dress. Calmly, that Manchu shepherd, without curiosity, still less with wonder, but as one who would see whatever life has to show him, stood for 4 hours to see if another would come. The sleet and the east wind continued, and at the end of 4 hours another came. The driver was urging it on as fast as he could, as though he were making the most of the daylight. His cabby's cape was flapping wildly about him. Inside the cab a man in evening dress was being jolted up and down by the unevenness of the plain. This was, of course, that famous race from Pittsburgh to Piccadilly, going round by the long way, that started one night after dinner from Mr. Flagdrop's house, and was won by Mr. Cagg, driving the Honourable Alfred Fortescue, whose father, it will be remembered, was Hager Durmstein, and became, by letters patent, Sir Edgar Fortescue, and finally Lord St. George. The Manchu shepherd stood there till evening, and when he saw that no more cabs would come, turned homeward in search of food. And the rice prepared for him was hot and good, all the more after the bitter coldness of that sleet. And when he had consumed it, he perused his experience, turning over again in his mind each detail of the cabs he had seen, and from that his thoughts slipped calmly to the glorious history of China, going back to the indecorous times before calmness came, and beyond those times to the happy days of the earth when the gods and dragons were here and China was young. And lighting his opium pipe and casting his thoughts easily forward, he looked to the time when the dragons shall come again. And for a long while then, his mind reposed itself in such a dignified calm that no thought stirred there at all, from which when he was aroused, he cast off his lethargy as a man emerges from the baths, refreshed, cleansed, and contented, and put away from his musings the things he had seen on the plain as being evil and of the nature of dreams or futile illusion, the results of activity which troubleth calm. And then he turned his mind toward the shape of God, the One, the Ineffable, who sits by the lotus lily, whose shape is the shape of peace, and denieth activity, and went out his thanks to him, that he had cast all bad customs westward, out of China, as a woman throws household dirt out of her basket far out into neighboring gardens. From thankfulness he turned to calm again, and out of calm to sleep. End of section 4. Section 5 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Assaf Koss. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. A Pretty Quarrel. On one of those unattained and unattainable pinnacles that are known as the Bleaks of Erie, an eagle was looking east with a hopeful presage of blood. For he knew and rejoiced in the knowledge that eastward over the dells the dwarfs were risen in Ulk and gone to war with the demigods. The demigods are they that were born of earthly women, but their sires are the elder gods, who walked of old among men. Disguised, they would go through the villages sometimes in summer evenings, cloaked and unknown of man. But the younger maidens knew them, and always ran to them singing, for all that their elders said. In evenings long ago they had danced to the woods of the oak trees. Their children dwelt out of doors, beyond the dells of the bracken, in the cool and heathery lands, and were now at war with the dwarfs. Dour and grim were the demigods, and had the faults of both parents, and would not mix with men, but claimed the right of their fathers, and would not play human games, but forever were prophesying, and yet were more frivolous than their mothers were, whom the fairies had long since buried in wildwood gardens with more than human rights. And being irked at their lack of rights, and ill content with the land, and having no power at all over the wind and snow, and caring little for the powers they had, the demigods became idle, greasy, and slow, and the contemptuous dwarfs despised them ever. The dwarfs were contemptuous of all things savouring of heaven, and of everything that was even partly divine. They were, so it has been said, of the seed of man, but, being squat and hairy, like to the beasts. They praised all beastly things, and bestiality was shown reverence among them, so far as reverence was theirs to show. So most of all they despised the discontent of the demigods, who dreamed of the courts of heaven, and power over wind and snow. For what better, said the dwarfs, could demigods do than nose in the earth for roots, and cover their faces with mire, and run with the cheerful goats, and be even as they? Now in their idleness, caused by their discontent, the seed of the gods and the maidens grew more discontented still, and only spake of or cared for heavenly things, until the contempt of the dwarfs, who heard of all these doings, was bridled no longer, and it must needs be war. They burned spice, dipped in blood and dried, before the chief of their witches, sharpening their axes, and made war on the demigods. They passed by night over the Ulna mountains, each dwarf with his good axe, the old flint war axe of his fathers, a night when no moon shone, and they went unshod, and swiftly to come on the demigods, in the darkness beyond the dells of Ulk, lying fat and idle and contemptible. And before it was light, they found the heathery lands, and the demigods lying lazy all over the side of a hill. The dwarf stole towards them warily in the darkness. Now the art that the gods love most is the art of war, and when the seed of the gods and those nimble maidens awoke, and found it was war, it was almost as much to them as the godlike pursuits of heaven enjoyed in the marble courts, or power over wind and snow. They all drew out at once their swords of tempered bronze, cast down to them centuries since, on stormy nights when their fathers drew them and faced the dwarfs, and casting their idleness from them, fell on them sword to axe. And the dwarfs fought hard that night, and bruised the demigods sorely, hacking with those huge axes that had not spared the oaks. Yet for all the weight of their blows, and the cunning of their adventure, one point they had overlooked: the demigods were immortal. As the fight rolled on towards morning, the fighters were fewer and fewer, yet for all the blows of the dwarfs, men fell upon one side only. Dawn came, and the demigods were fighting against no more than 6, and the hour that follows dawn, and the last of the dwarfs was gone. And when the light was clear on that peak of the Bleaks of Erie, the eagle left his crag, and flew grimly east, and found it was as he had hoped, in the matter of blood. But the demigods lay down in their heathery lands, for once content those so far from the courts of heaven, and even have forgot their heavenly rights, and sighed no more for power over wind and snow. End of section 5.
Section 6 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. How the Gods Avenged Meoul Ning. How the Gods Avenged Meoul Ning. Meoul Ning was on his way with a lily from the lotus ponds of Esh to offer it to the goddess of abundance in her temple Aul-Karun. And on the road from the pond to the little hill in the temple Aul-Karun, Ap-Ariph, his enemy, shot him with an arrow from a bow that he had made out of bamboo, and took his pretty lily up the hill and offered it to the goddess of abundance in her temple Aul-Karun. And the goddess was pleased with the gift, as all women are, and sent pleasant dreams to Ap-Ariph for 7 nights straight from the moon. And on the 7th night the gods held conclave together. On the cloudy peaks they held it above Narn, Khatun, and Pati. So high their peak arises that no man heard their voices. They spake on that cloudy mountain, not the highest hamlet heard them. What does the goddess of abundance, but naming her Lling as they name her? What doth she, sending sweet dreams for 7 nights to Ap-Ariph? And the gods sent for their seer, who is all eyes and feet, running to and fro on the earth, observing the ways of men, seeing even their littlest doings, never deeming a doing too little, but knowing the web of the gods is woven of littlest things. He it is that sees the cat in the garden of parakeets, the thief in the upper chamber, the sin of the child with the honey, the women talking indoors, and the small hut's innermost things. Standing before the gods, he told them the case of Ap-Ariph, and the wrongs of Meoul Ning, and the rape of the lotus lily. He told of the cutting and making of Ap-Ariph's bamboo bow, of the shooting of Meoul Ning, and of how the arrow hit him, and the smile on the face of Lling when she came by the lotus bloom. And the gods were wroth with Ap-Ariph, and swore to avenge Ning. And the ancient one of the gods, he that is older than earth, called up the thunder at once, and raised his arms and cried out on the gods' high windy mountain, and prophesied on those rocks with runes that were older than speech, and sang in his wrath old songs that he had learned in storm from the sea, when only that peak of the gods in the whole of the earth was dry, and he swore that Ap-Ariph should die that night, and the thunder raged about him, and the tears of Lling were vain. The lightning stroke of the gods leaping earthward seeking Ap-Ariph passed near to his house, but missed him. A certain vagabond was down from the hills, singing songs in the street near by the house of Ap-Ariph, songs of a former folk that dwelt once, they say, in those valleys, and begging for rice and curds. It was him the lightning hit. And the gods were satisfied, and their wrath abated, and their thunder rolled away, and the great black clouds dissolved, and the ancient one of the gods went back to his age-old sleep. And morning came, and the birds and the light shone on the mountain, and the peak stood clear to see, the serene home of the gods. End of section 6. Section 7 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. The Gift of the Gods. The Gift of the Gods. There was once a man who sought a boon of the gods, for peace was over the world, and all things savoured of sameness, and the man was weary at heart, and sighed for the tents and the war fields. Therefore he sought a boon of the ancient gods. And appearing before them, he said to them, Ancient gods, there is peace in the land where I dwell, and indeed to the uttermost parts, and we are full weary of peace. O ancient gods, grant us a war. And the ancient gods made him a war. And the man went forth with his sword, and behold, it was even war. And the man remembered the little things that he knew, and thought of the quiet days that there used to be, and at night on the hard ground dreamed of the things of peace. And dearer grew the wanted things, the dull but easeful things of the days of peace. And remembering these, he began to regret the war, and sought once more a boon of the ancient gods. And appearing before them, he said, O ancient gods, indeed but a man loves best the days of peace. Therefore take back your war and give us peace, for indeed of all your blessedness peace is the best. And the man returned again to the haunts of peace. But in a while the man grew weary of peace, of the things that he used to know, and the savour of sameness again, and sighing again for the tents, and appearing once more to the gods, he said to them, Ancient gods, we do not love your peace, for indeed the days are dull, and a man is best at war. And the gods made him a war. And there were drums again, the smoke of camp-fires again, wind in the waste again, the sound of horses of war, burning cities again, and the things that wanderers know, and the thoughts of that man went home to the ways of peace. Moss upon lawns again, light in old spires again, sun upon gardens again, flowers in pleasant woods, and sleep and the paths of peace. And once more the man appeared to the ancient gods, and sought from them one more boon, and said to them, Ancient gods, indeed but the world and we are aweary of war, and long for the ancient ways and the paths of peace. So the gods took back their war and gave him peace. But the man took counsel one day and communed long with himself, and said to himself, Behold, the wishes I wish, which the gods grant, are not to be much desired. And if the gods should one day grant a wish and never revoke it, which is a way of the gods, I should be sorely tried because of my wish. My wishes are dangerous wishes, and not to be desired. And therefore he wrote an anonymous letter to the gods, writing, O ancient gods, this man that hath 4 times troubled you with his wishes, wishing for peace and war, is a man that hath no reverence for the gods, speaking ill of them on days when they do not hear, and speaking well of them on holy days and at the appointed hours when the gods are hearkening to prayer. Therefore grant no more wishes to this impious man. And the days of peace wore on, and there arose again from the earth, like mist in the autumn from the fields that generations have ploughed, the savour of sameness again. And the man went forth one morning, and appeared once more to the gods, and cried, O ancient gods, give us but one war again, for I would be back to the camps and debatable borders of lands. And the gods said, We hear not well of your way of life, yea, ill things have come to our hearing, so that we grant no more the wishes you wish. End of section 7.
Section 8 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. The Sack of Emeralds. One bad October night, in the high wolds beyond Wiltshire, with the north wind chanting of winter, with the old leaves letting go their hold one by one from branches and dropping down to decay, with the mournful sound of owls, and in fearsome loneliness, there trudged in broken boots and in wet and windy rags an old man, stooping low under a sack of emeralds. It were easy to see, had you been travelling late on that inauspicious night, that the burden of the sack was far too great for the poor old man that bore it. And had you flashed a lantern in his face, there was a look there of hopelessness and fatigue that would have told you it was no wish of his that kept him tottering on under the bloated sack. When the menacing look of the night and its cheerless sound, and the cold, and the weight of the sack, had all but brought him to the door of death, and he had dropped his sack onto the road and was dragging it on behind him, just as he felt that his final hour was come, and come, which was worse, as he held the accursed sack. Just then he saw the bulk and the black shape of the sign of the lost shepherd loom up by the ragged way. He opened the door and staggered into the light and sat on a bench with his huge sack beside him. All this you had seen had you been on that lonely road, so late on those bitter wolds, with their outlines vast and mournful in the dark, and their little clumps of trees sad with October. But neither you nor I were out that night. I did not see the poor man and his sack until he sank down all of a heap in the lighted inn. And Jan, the blacksmith, was there, and the carpenter, Willie Losh, and Jackers, the postman's son, and they gave him a glass of beer, and the old man drank it up, still hugging his emeralds. And at last they asked him what he had in his sack, the question he clearly dreaded, and he only clasped yet tighter the sodden sack and mumbled he had potatoes.
"Potatoes,"
said Jan the blacksmith.
"Potatoes,"
said Willie Losh. And when he heard the doubt that was in their voices, the old man shivered and moaned.
"Potatoes, did you say?"
said the postman's son. And they all three rose and tried to peer at the sack that the rain-soaked wayfarer so zealously sheltered. And from the old man's fierceness I had said that, had it not been for that foul night on the roads and the weight he had carried so far and the fearful winds of October, he had fought with the blacksmith, the carpenter, and the postman's son, all three, till he beat them away from his sack. And weary and wet as he was, he fought them hard. I should no doubt have interfered, and yet the three men meant no harm to the wayfarer, but resented the reticence that he displayed to them, though they had given him beer. It was to them as though a master key had failed to open a cupboard, and, as for me, curiosity held me down to my chair and forbade me to interfere on behalf of the sack. For the old man's furtive ways, and the night out of which he came, and the hour of his coming, and the look of his sack, all made me long as much to know what he had, as even the blacksmith, the carpenter, and the postman's son. And then they found the emeralds. They were all bigger than hazelnuts, hundreds of them, and the old man screamed.
Come, come, we're not thieves,"
said the blacksmith.
"We're not thieves,"
said the carpenter. "We're not thieves," said the postman's son. And with awful fear on his face, the wayfarer closed his sack, whimpering over his emeralds and furtively glancing round as though the loss of his secret were an utterly deadly thing. And then they asked him to give them just one each, just one huge emerald each, because they had given him a glass of beer. Then to see the wayfarer shrink against his sack and guard it with clutching fingers, one would have said that he was a selfish man. were it not for the terror that was freezing his face. I have seen men look sheer at death with far less fear. And they took their emeralds, all three, one enormous emerald each, while the old man hopelessly struggled till he saw his 3 emeralds go, and fell to the floor and wept, a pitiable, sodden heap. And about that time I began to hear far off down the windy road, by which the sack had come, faintly at first, and slowly louder and louder, the click-clack-clop of a lame horse coming nearer, click-clack-clop, and the loose shoe rattling, the sound of a horse too weary to be out upon such a night, too lame to be out at all. Click, clack, clop. And all of a sudden the old wayfarer heard it above the sound of his wan sobbing, and at once went white to the lips. Such sudden fear as blanched him in a moment struck right to the hearts of all there. They muttered to him that it was only their play. They hastily whispered excuses. They asked him what was wrong, but seemed scarcely to hope for an answer. Nor did he speak, but sat with a frozen stare, all at once dry-eyed, a monument to terror. Nearer and nearer came the click-clack-clop, and when I saw the expression on that man's face, and how its horror deepened as the ominous sound drew nearer, then I knew that something was wrong. And looking for the last time upon all 4, I saw the wayfarer horror-struck by his sack, and the other 3 crowding round to put their huge emeralds back then. Even on such a night, I slipped away from the inn. Outside the bitter wind roared in my ears, and close in the darkness the horse went click-clack-clop. And as soon as my eyes could see at all in the night, I saw a man in a huge hat looped up in front, wearing a sword in a scabbard shabby and huge, and looking blacker than the darkness, riding on a lean horse slowly up to the inn. Whether his were the emeralds, or who he was, or why he rode a lame horse on such a night, I did not stop to discover, but went at once from the inn as he strode in his great black riding coat up to the door. And that was the last that was ever seen of the wayfarer, the blacksmith, the carpenter, or the postman's son. End of section 8.
Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eileen Tipping. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. The Old Brown Coat. My friend Mr. Douglas Ainsley tells me that Sir James Barrie once told him this story. The story, or rather the fragment, was as follows. A man strolling into an auction somewhere abroad, I think it must have been France, for they bid in francs, found they were selling old clothes, and following some idle whim, he soon found himself bidding for an old coat. A man bid against him. He bid against the man. Up and up went the price, till the old coat was knocked down to him for 20 pounds. As he went away with the coat, he saw the other bidder looking at him with an expression of fury. That's as far as the story goes. But how, Mr. Ainsley asked me, did the matter develop, and why that furious look? I at once made enquiries at a reliable source, and have ascertained that the man's name was Peters, who thus oddly purchased a coat, and that he took it to the Rue de Rivoli, to a hotel where he lodged. From that little low dark auction-room by the Seine in which he concluded the bargain. There he examined it off and on all day and much of the next morning. A light brown overcoat with tails, without discovering any excuse, far less a reason for having spent £20 on so worn a thing. And late the next morning, to his sitting-room, looking out on the gardens of the Tuileries, the man with the furious look was ushered in. Grim he stood, silent and angry, till the guiding waiter went. Not till then did he speak, and his words came clear and brief, welling up from deep emotions. "How did you dare to bid against me?" His name was Santiago, and for many moments Peters found no excuse to offer, no apology, nothing in extenuation. Lamely at last, weakly, knowing his argument to be of no avail, he muttered something to the intent that Mr. Santiago could have outbid him. "No," said the stranger, "we don't want all the town in this. This is a matter between you and me." He paused, then added in his fierce, curt way, £1,000, no more. Almost dumbly, Peters accepted the offer, and pocketing the £1,000 that was paid him, and apologizing for the inconvenience he had unwittingly caused, tried to show the stranger out. But Santiago strode swiftly on before him, taking the coat, and was gone. There followed between Peters and his second thoughts another long afternoon of bitter reproaches. Why ever had he let go so thoughtlessly of a garment that so easily fetched £1,000? And the more he brooded on this, the more clearly did he perceive that he had lost an unusual opportunity of a first-class investment of a speculative kind. He knew men, perhaps better than he knew materials, and though he could not see in that old brown coat the value of so much as £1,000, he saw far more than that in the man's eager need for it. An afternoon of brooding over lost opportunities led to a night of remorse, and scarcely had day dawned when he ran to his sitting-room to see if he still had safe the card of Santiago. And there was the neat and perfumed carte de visite, with Santiago's Parisian address in the corner. That afternoon he sought him out, and found Santiago seated at a table with chemicals and magnifying glasses beside him, examining as it lay spread wide before him the old brown coat. And Peters fancied he wore a puzzled air. They came at once to business. Peters was rich, and asked Santiago to name his price. And that small, dark man admitted financial straits, and so was willing to sell for £30,000. A little bargaining followed. The price came down, and the old brown coat changed hands once more for £20,000. Let anyone who may be inclined to doubt my story understand that in the city, as any respectable company promoter will tell them, £20,000 is invested almost daily, with less return for it than an old tailcoat. And whatever doubts Mr. Peters felt that day about the wisdom of his investment, there before him lay that tangible return, that something that may be actually fingered and seen, which is so often denied to the investor in gold mines and other selected investments. Yet, as the days wore on and the old coat grew no younger, nor any more wonderful, nor the least useful, but more and more like an ordinary old coat, Peters began once more to doubt his astuteness. Before the week was out, his doubts had grown acute, and then one morning Santiago returned. A man, he said, had just arrived from Spain, a friend unexpected all of a sudden in Paris, from whom he might borrow money. And would Peters resell the coat for £30,000? It was then that Peters, seeing his opportunity, cast aside the pretense that he had maintained for so long of knowing something about the mysterious coat, and demanded to know its properties. Santiago swore that he knew not, and repeatedly swore the same by many sacred names. But when Peters as often threatened not to sell, Santiago at last drew out a thin cigar, and lighting it, and settling himself in a chair, told all he knew of the coat. He had been on its tracks for weeks, with suspicions growing all the time that it was no ordinary coat. And at last he had run it to earth in that auction-room, but would not bid for it more than £20 for fear of letting everyone into the secret. What the secret was, he swore he did not know, but this much he knew all along, that the weight of the coat was absolutely nothing, and he had discovered by testing it with acids that the brown stuff of which the coat was made was neither cloth nor silk, nor any known material, and would neither burn nor tear. He believed it to be some undiscovered element, and the properties of the coat, which he was convinced were marvellous, he felt sure of discovering within another week by means of experiments with his chemicals. Again he offered £30,000 to be paid within 2 or 3 days if all went well, and then they started haggling together, as business men will. And all the morning went by over the gardens of the Tuileries, and the afternoons came on, and only by 2 o'clock they arrived at an understanding, on a basis, as they called it, of 30,000 guineas. And the old tailcoat was brought out and spread on the table, and they examined it together and chatted about its properties, all the more friendly for their strenuous argument. And Santiago was rising up to go, and Peters pleasantly holding out his hand, when a step was heard on the stair. It echoed up into the room. The door opened, and an elderly, labouring man came stumping in. He walked with difficulty, almost like a bather who has been swimming and floating all morning and misses the buoyancy of the water when he has come to land. He stumped up to the table without speaking, and there at once caught the sight of the old brown coat. "Why," he said, "that be my old coat." And without another word he put it on. In the fierce glare of his eyes as he fitted on that coat, carefully fastening the buttons, buttoning up the flap of a pocket here, unbuttoning one there, neither Peters nor Santiago found a word to say. They sat there wondering how they had dared to bid for that brown tailcoat, how they had dared to buy it, even to touch it. They sat there silent without a single excuse. And with no word more, the old labourer stumped across the room, opened wide the double window that looked on the Tuileries Gardens, and flashing back over his shoulder one look that was full of scorn, stumped away up through the air at an angle of 40 degrees. Peters and Santiago saw him bear to his left from the window, passing diagonally over the Rue de Rivoli and over a corner of the Tuileries Gardens. They saw him clear the Louvre, and thence they dumbly watched him, still slanting upward, stepping out with a firmer and more confident stride, as he dwindled and dwindled away with his old brown coat. Neither spoke till he was no more than a speck in the sky, far away over Paris, going southeastwards. "Well, I am blowed," said Peters. But Santiago sadly shook his head. "I knew it was a good coat," he said. I knew it was a good coat. End of Section 9 of Tales of the Three Hemispheres.
Section 10 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany, an archive of the older mysteries. An archive of the older mysteries. It is told in the archive of the older mysteries of China that one of the house of Tsung was cunning with sharpened iron and went to the green jade mountains and carved a green jade god. And this was in the cycle of the dragon, the 78th year. And for nearly 100 years men doubted the green jade god, and then they worshipped him for 1,000 years, and after that they doubted him again, and the green jade god made a miracle and whelmed the green jade mountains, sinking them down one evening at sunset into the earth, so that there is only a marsh where the green jade mountains were, and the marsh is full of the lotus. By the side of this lotus marsh, just as it glitters at evening, walks Li-La-Ting, the Chinese girl, to bring the cows home. She goes behind them singing of the river Lo-Lang-Ho, and thus she sings of the river, even of Lo-Lang-Ho. She sings that he is indeed of all rivers the greatest, born of more ancient mountains than even the wise men know, swifter than hares, more deep than the sea, the master of other rivers, perfumed even as roses, and fairer than the sapphires round the neck of a prince. And then she would pray to the river Lo-Lang-Ho, master of rivers and rival of the heaven at dawn, to bring her down in a boat of light bamboo a lover, rowing out of the inner land in a garment of yellow silk, with turquoises at his waist, young and merry and idle, with a face as yellow as gold, and a ruby in his cap, with lanterns shining at dusk. Thus she would pray of an evening to the river Lo-Lang-Ho, as she went behind the cows at the edge of the lotus marshes, and the green jade god under the lotus marshes was jealous of the lover that the maiden Li-La-Ting would pray for, of an evening, to the river Lo-Lang-Ho, and he cursed the river after the manner of gods, and turned it into a narrow and evil-smelling stream. And all this happened 1,000 years ago, and Lo-Lang-Ho is but a reproach among travellers, and the story of that great river is forgotten. And what became of the maiden, no tale saith, though all men think she became a goddess of jade, to sit and smile at a lotus, on a lotus carven of stone, by the side of the green jade god, far under the marshes upon the peaks of the mountains. But women know that her ghost still haunts the lotus marshes on glittering evenings, singing of Lo-Lang-Ho. End of Section 10.
Section 11 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marina Tsung. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. A City of Wonder. Past the upper corner of a precipice, the moon rode into view. Night had for some while now hooded the marvelous city. They had planned it to be symmetrical. Its maps were orderly, near. In 2 dimensions, that is length and breadth, its streets met and crossed each other with regular exactitude, with all the dullness of the science of man. The city had laughed, as it were, and shaken itself free, and in the 3rd dimension had soared away to consort with all the careless, irregular things that know not man for their master. Yet even there, even at those altitudes, man had still clung to his symmetry, still claimed that these mountains were houses. In orderly rows, the 1,000 windows stood watching each other precisely, all orderly, all alike, lest any should guess by day that there might be mystery here. So they stood in the daylight. The sun set. Still they were orderly, as scientific and regular as the labor of only man and the bees. The mists darken at evening. And first, the Woolworth building goes away, sheer home, and away from any allegiance to man, to take his place among mountains. For I saw him stand with the lower slopes invisible in the gloaming, while only his pinnacles showed up in the clearer sky. Thus only mountains stand. Still, all the windows of the other buildings stood in their regular rows, all side by side in silence, not yet changed, as though waiting one furtive moment to step from the schemes of man, to slip back to mystery and romance again, as cats do, when they steal on velvet feet away from familiar hearths in the dark of the moon. Night fell, and the moment came. Someone lit a window. Far up another shone with its orange glow, window by window, and yet not nearly all. Surely, if modern man with his clever schemes held any sway here still, he would have turned one switch and lit them all together. But we are back with the older man, of whom far songs tell, he whose spirit is kin to strange romances and mountains. One by one the windows shine from the precipices. Some twinkle, some are dark. Man's orderly schemes have gone, and we are amongst vast heights, lit by inscrutable beacons. I have seen such cities before, and I have told of them in the Book of Wonder. Here in New York, a poet met a welcome. End of section 11.
Section 12 of Tales of Three Hemispheres. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anne Boulais. Tales of Three Hemispheres by Lord Dunsany. Beyond the Fields We Know. Publisher's Note. Beyond the fields we know, in the lands of dream, lies the valley of the Yann, where the mighty river of that name, rising in the hills of Hap, idling its way by massive dream-evoking amethyst cliffs, orchid-laden forests, and ancient mysterious cities, comes to the gates of Yann and passes to the sea. Some years since a poet visiting that land voyaged down the Yann on a trading bark named the Bird of the River, and returning safe to Ireland, set down in a tale that is called Idle Days on the Yann, the wonders of that voyage. Now the tale, being one of marvellous beauty, found its way into a volume we call A Dreamer's Tales, where it may be found to this day with other wondrous tales of that same poet. As the days went by, the lure of the river and pleasant memories of his shipmates bore in with a constant urge on the soul of the poet that he might once more journey beyond the fields we know and come to the floor of Yann. And one day it fell out that, turning into Go-by Street, that leads up from the embankment toward the Strand, and which you and I always do go by and perhaps never see in passing, he found the door which one enters on the way to the land of dream. Twice of late has Lord Dunsany entered that door in Go-by Street and returned to the valley of the Yann, and each time come back with a tale. One of his search for the Bird of the River, the other of the mighty hunter who avenged the destruction of Perdóndaris, where on his earlier voyage the captain tied up his ship and traded within the city. That all may be clear to those who read these new tales, and to whom no report has previously come beyond the fields we know, the publishers reprint in this volume Idle Days on the Yann. End of section 12.